Christian Short. Mark Riley.
Mark Riley, the 7 Network Senator Brown. You must know you played right into the sweet spot of all the conspiracy theorists today with your support for a global parliament. I'm wondering how you would see such an organisation operating. Are you talking about an international treaty organisation that might sign up to collective commitments on certain issues, or something that might legislate and then come into conflict with national parliaments? And, excuse me, a little bit of a self-interest, if it is going to be in Australia, can it be at Jervis Bay? Because that's where Canberra should have been in the first place, surely.
Yeah, but Jervis Bay is so beautiful. I'd like to keep that national park right like it is, and nuclear power station free, I might add. I was doing my Windsor knot before I came here, thinking of the House of Windsor, and of course they always get wound into these conspiracies, don't they? No, look, we are moving towards a globally informed community that's got to live with itself. And we have always espoused democracy. I can tell you that the 2 moves the Greens have made for a global democratic support for moves in the United Nations have been voted down by all other parties, both in 2002 and earlier this year. This is conceptual. But I'm talking here about vision. Why should Australia not be the centre of what is inevitably going to be a global parliamentary governance?
Okay, so then we've got a final proposed amendment to the Charter that's been proposed by the Australian Greens, and it's replacing the...
What the workshop is, and they want to keep the original text.
Okay, that's the original text is up the top, and the proposal is to keep that original text rather than have the proposed change that came out of the workshop. So the proposal is...
Is that understood? So there was, you have received this document before, a week ago, 10 days ago. There was an Article 113, which was the text on the top. During this weekend, the workshop changed this into the text below, but the Australians want to have a vote on it because they prefer the first text, but you will choose what you prefer. Yeah?
The text up the top is a move towards global democracy based on equality of all the people around the planet. The new text is talking about multilateral institutions, presumably already existing, and appropriate democratic and universal principles, which is vague. The top one is specific, the bottom one is vague, and I think the top one should be supported.
Do we have a speaker that wishes to speak in favour of the bottom text?
Yeah, we looked at this wording carefully in the workshop. We don't disagree with the principles which Bob has just enunciated, but we felt that the text was actually not well worded to cover all eventualities. Global governance includes the Security Council of the United Nations. That is not capable of being operated on the basis of one person, one vote. So we tried to create a more generalised statement, understanding that perhaps the language is less specific, and that was the intention, not to deny the values in the first paragraph, but to express them more generally.
Life for those wishing to re-register their car in another part of Europe may soon be about to get easier. Changing number plates continues to be one of the biggest bureaucratic gripes for many motorists switching countries inside the EU. Numerous technical tests, double payment and other red tape remain common complaints. But Brussels is bound to end the administrative nightmare within the next year or so. Under the European Commission's plan, member countries must make re-registration procedures for cars and other vehicles, including trucks, much simpler. Eventually, that should make buying second-hand motors elsewhere in the EU and returning home easier. It could also be good news for tourists wishing to rent. Currently, car rental companies have faced difficulties moving vehicles across the bloc. If we see savings in our logistical costs, the fact we're in an extremely competitive market means some of those savings will bring down rental prices. That's clear. but the latest proposal falls short of a pan-European registration certificate, as our correspondent explains. In many ways, a simpler solution might have been to abolish national plates and have one single European registration. For the moment, however, that is a road Europe doesn't seem to want to go down.
Yep, that's a road they don't want to go down. Yet, at least, right? So it's all in the name of convenience, where you sell out your, basically your national sovereignty, your privacy, whatever. And, you know, in this first video, what did we see? Oh, it's just a conspiracy theory, right? And then in the next video, Bob Brown's global government voted on at the Global Greens Congress, and they weren't exactly voting on whether they wanted to be part of a global government or to have a global government or not. No, they were just, do we want to have it run by multilateral institutions? And he said they already exist, because he knows that that's actually who really runs things. Or do we want to go with a more democratic form, right? Because democracy probably never really existed as we know it. I mean, it's just a different form of controlling. You know, one vote, whatever. You can go ahead and vote, but it doesn't mean anything. So I just thought it was kind of funny that they were both, kind of voting on global government. They just they were just kind of voting on the wording and whatnot. So, okay, so I'm ready to go here. Lots of information to get to. NASA scientists, climate change is a moral issue on par with slavery. So Jim Hansen, a professor, he goes on and he says to use a lecture at Edinburgh International Science Festival to call on worldwide tax on all carbon emissions. So global carbon tax for climate change, which is going to go towards what? The global government. So averting the worst consequences of human-induced climate change, i.e. Basically planes flying at a high altitude, spraying of aerosols and causing a warming effect, is a great moral issue, right? And it says here on par with slavery. So he argues that storing up expensive and destructive consequences for society in the future is an injustice for one generation to the others. So he goes on here and he calls for a worldwide tax on carbon emissions, so a global carbon tax. And if you think it's just rubbish, this individual is regarded as one of the most influential figures in the climate junk science field. So moving on here, we have, remember this, effective world government will be needed to stave off climate catastrophe. So we're going to need a global government to help fight this man-made climate change that's being done. UN-sponsored scientists push for global government from April 5th, 2012. A team of United Nations-sponsored scientists are pushing for global government through a short film they released. The promo for the film, Welcome to Anthropocene, contends it is a story of how one species changed a planet. The website promoting it indicates that it was set up by, quote, researchers and communicators from some of the leading scientific research institutions in global sustainability, i.e. eugenics. So it goes in and says it's nothing new in the area of science, with the same agenda in which American people have become familiar. The earth is overpopulated, the ice caps are melting, the sea level is rising, and it's all your fault, right? For driving your car to your crappy job. So the solution to these disastrous elements, according to the film, is global government. Key climate change scientists feature the short film on their own website, including the one who stated that anyone who questions the notion of climate change is mentally ill, and have used it to call for global government to correct human-induced climate change. So the State of the Planet Declaration issued by the United Nations-backed organization advocates world government, which it calls, quote, Earth System Governance. And you got to remember that word governance isn't actually government, representative, or democratic. It's a dictatorship. So they like to play those word games. The declaration reads, governments must take action to support institutions and mechanisms that will improve coherence, as well as bring about integrated policy and action across social, economic, environmental pillars. Again, with that word pillars, it says the current understanding supports the creation of Sustainable Development Council within the UN system, to integrate social, economic, and environmental policy at the global level. There is a strong support for strengthening global governance by including civil society, business, and industry in decision-making at all levels. So it's required to strengthen global governance includes continued exploration of new areas of knowledge, such as theoretical and applied research in behavioral science. But that agenda was years in the making. In 1990, Maurice Strong, the leader of the international environmental movement, asked, quote, "What if a small group of these world leaders were to conclude that the principal risk to the earth comes from the actions of the rich countries," that's us guys, just in case you forgot how rich you are, "in order to save the planet, the group decides, isn't the only hope for the planet that the industrialized civilization's collapse? Isn't it our responsibility to bring it about?" End quote. This was allegedly a speculative plot for a novel that Strong was considering writing, though he had never penned the novel before or after 1990. And now he's the head of the United Nations Environmental Program because he pushed it, right? So don't forget the Club of Rome statement as well. So you can go in there and see some of the principles of these Greens and global government. This is their actual website talking about the Australian Greens believe that global governance is essential to the needs of the global peace, security, justice, human rights, poverty, alleviation, and environmental sustainability. So you can go there and check them all out. So they say basically global government must be reinvigorated, basically forced on you and coerced on you, you to be coerced to accept this. The leading role of the United Nations in the maintenance of international peace and security must be recognized and respected by all national sovereign countries. A stronger UN capable of dealing with threats to international peace and security. Full support for and adequate resourcing of the International Criminal Court. And they also want a green court too, with green police. Moving on, we have fear of tyranny is now treated as psychiatric disorder in the West. So the elites in all totalitarian prisons use the language of mental health to dismiss dissenters and enforce their dogmatic beliefs in totalitarian policies and an unwilling public. In 2009, Brendan O'Neill of Spike.com wrote a powerful essay called I'm going to have a hard time pronouncing this, but basically the psychologization of dissent, the global warming skepticism, mental disorder, about how the West is following the footsteps of the Soviet Union. O'Neill wrote, the idea that climate change denial is a psychological disorder, the product of a spiteful, willful, or simply inbuilt neural inability to face up to catastrophe of global warming, is becoming more and more popular among green-leaning activists and academics, i.e. eco-fascists, or eugenicists, and nothing better sums up the elitism and authoritarianism of the environmentalist lobby than its psychologization of dissent. So the labeling of any criticism of the politics of global warming, first as denial, kind of like a Holocaust denier, and he goes on here and says, and now as evidence of mass psychological instability, is an attempt to write off all critics and skeptics as deranged and to lay the groundwork for inevitable authoritarian solutions to the problem of climate change. That means they could just lock you up, right? And the young people in schools, these re-education camps, they're being taught that too. Over 40% of California public school suspensions are for willful defiance or disruption. So anti-authoritarian disorder is what they would call it. So, and a lot of them are actually getting locked up behind jail for stuff that's going on in school. China buys inroads into the Caribbean, catching U.S. notice. They bought a $35 million stadium in the Bahamas a few weeks ago, a gift from the Chinese government. Then Wyoming town population one sells for $900,000 to a Vietnamese buyer. The buyer said that he flew to Wyoming from Vietnam for a purchase he likened to the American dream. So the American dream is basically selling all of the property and stuff like that off to foreign countries and foreign individuals. Billionaires should be allowed to buy up planets and rip up an out-of-date space treaty, claims expert. Private companies should be able to buy land on the moon or other planets or tourism. So they already have mining rights. People already own mining rights to the moon, just in case you didn't know. For rent, Greek police available for 30 euros an hour. So they're renting out their cops now in Greece as people are committing suicide and getting ready to jump off buildings. And UK exporting surveillance technology to repressive nations, to themselves? David Cameron defends secret courts and surveillance plans. So there you go. Moving on here, we have Berlin wants panels to check EU fiscal discipline. He wants independent panels of academics, i.e. Technocrats and experts, to keep a close eye on states' budgets. So that's really good. A modest step for the Eurozone is what? A bailout of $1 trillion. So it's a very modest step. Improvised bomb explodes outside Greek Reform Ministry. So things are getting kind of bad over there. And then we have Britain plants stake in Myanmar's future. Well, a stake in what? Like in Somalia, they have a stake in oil. UK firms in secret talks on joining Burma gold rush. Well, how are they going to do that? China calls for lifting of Myanmar sanctions, i.e. Burma. Well, U.S. to ease sanctions against Burma. So they're listening to China. And she's basically an agent for Britain, going to Oxford and whatnot. Jefferson Parish gets $600,000 playground grant from FEMA, i.e. they're going to be turned into FEMA camps. Next up, we have world food prices rise further, raising fears of unrest. The U.S. Army has riot control exercises, or as they call it, civil disturbance training. And this was in Washington State. Here's a soldier basically playing a restless FEMA prison inmate. So the black community fears it was a hate crime, but the Tulsa shooting suspect is an American Indian. This is GGN and I'm Darko. Thank you.